This program is brought to you by the Merdeka Award, an initiative to promote excellence by ExxonMobil, Petronas, and Shell.
Hello and welcome. This is the Merdeka Award Roundtable. My name is Cynthia Ng. Today we will be discussing on the topic of biodiversity. Now, biodiversity is essentially a variety of living things in an ecosystem, and that largely forms the basis of human existence. Now, to put it simply, biodiversity is our life support system. Now, sadly right now, the world is experiencing a dramatic loss of biodiversity, often resulting from unsustainable development driven by economic and social factors. So finding that right balance between conservation and development, that is a question, and how do we get there? And to give us some answers, I'm joined by a group of very passionate people who is leading efforts in their respective areas to help protect biodiversity. Please welcome, I have Ms. Elizabeth John, Senior Communications Officer for Traffic Southeast Asia. Now, Traffic is a wildlife monitoring network dedicated to conservation and building awareness on wildlife issues like poaching and trafficking. Welcome, Elizabeth. Next, we also have Professor Dr. Abdul Latif Muhammad, Emeritus Professor of University Kebangsaan Malaysia. Professor has more than 40 years of research in taxonomy and biodiversity under his belt. He is also a joint recipient of the Merdeka Award 2015 in the Environment category. Welcome, Professor. Now, next to me, I have Tan Sri Dr. Zakri Abdul Hamid. He is the Science Advisor to the Prime Minister, also the joint recipient for the 2015 Merdeka Award category in the Environment, and numerous other accolades which probably I couldn't have enough time to mention, but suffice to say, Tan Sri has been at the forefront championing biodiversity in Malaysia as well as at the global stage. Now, I also like to welcome Mr. Henry Goh. He is the President of Malaysian Nature Society, no stranger as a voice in advocacies for conservation initiatives. And rounding off this panel, I'm joined by Julian Hyde, General Manager of Reef Check Malaysia. Now, Reef Check is dedicated to conservation of reefs and raising awareness on their importance. Now, once again, thank you so much for coming to this show and to talk about biodiversity. And I'd like to start with this question, because biodiversity has been talked about, but maybe not as often as it should. Maybe Tan Sri can start with helping us understand just how important is diversity to people like you and me.
Mm-hmm. Well, as you said in the introduction, biodiversity is our life support system. And some people would like to call it as our web of life. And biodiversity and the services it provides, also known as ecosystem services, provide mankind with food, with feed, water, clean air, and all the works. But right now, as you also rightly pointed out, it's under threat. In fact, globally, 60% of the ecosystem services that we are used to receiving from nature is being degraded. Now, the world is not standing still. There's a lot of efforts to examine what can be done. In fact, this issue about biodiversity and ecosystem services started a long time ago, when American scholar and author named Rachel Carson, in her book The Silent Spring, calls for better appreciation of nature. So to make a long story short, during the Earth Summit in 1992, biodiversity is one of the issues that were being debated, negotiated, and agreed upon at the Earth Summit. And the other one, as you know, is climate change. But you also pointed out, in spite of all that, the issue of biodiversity has not really transpired through society. And this is where I think we need to do more to create more dialogue between the scientists, between the passionate NGOs, with the politicians, with the policy makers, with the industry, so that our life support system could be ensured, could be assured right to future generations. This is where we are at.
All right. So, but first, I suppose, to create that awareness, one has to understand just how important is biodiversity, and also what are the implications should we lose biodiversity. Professor, if you could enlighten us on that.
It is a simple, I would say, equation. When as a professor in the university, a teacher in university, we have been teaching the subject of biology, environment, from the primary school right to the tertiary level. And we have been disseminating the concept of life support system, the concept of biodiversity, the plants, the animals, and all the interaction at all levels. And of course, I believe, we have done, or rather the academia in Malaysia have done a wonderful job. But then again, as Tan Sri pointed out correctly just now, that if you go down to the street and ask the same people whom we taught 10 to 15 years ago, they would say negatively that they have not understood the importance of plants and animal or biodiversity environment. And yet these people are committing the same, I would say, degrading mechanism and processes that we have rather witnessed in the last many decades. So public awareness is important. I'm also involved with the NGOs, and we have done the similar thing that Tan Sri mentioned, i.e. engaging the industries, engaging the public, the school children, and we thought we have done a good job. We believe we have done enough, but then again, there is no agency to evaluate whether enough is enough or whether have we done a good job. If you ask people on the street, majority will say we haven't done enough. But that's not right at all.
All right, so from the academy point of view, now let's get to people who are undertaking those efforts on the ground. Let's start with Elizabeth, looking at from the wildlife perspective, what are some of the biggest threats that you are seeing in that space in Malaysia?
Well, for wildlife, poaching is a huge threat. Many local people are involved in going out and hunting, many without licenses, and their targets are the animals native to Malaysia that are already on the brink. Things like tigers, deer, pangolins, we see them collected in thousands and in every seizure that you see on television. So poaching and smuggling are one of the biggest threats you have facing wildlife today. But one thing that we are seeing that's causing the problem to escalate even further is what people are doing online. Mm-hmm. Now, we recently released a study where we looked at 14 Facebook groups in Peninsular Malaysia that buy and sell wildlife online, right? And just from 30 minutes a day for 5 months, from just these 14 groups, we found people selling over 300 animals, most of them protected under Malaysian laws, not supposed to be online bought or so. And and in total, these 14 groups had about 70,000 members. And that's just looking at Peninsular Malaysia. So, you have the threat on the ground from people who are going into the forest and getting the animals out, from people who are trading them through ports and airports or smuggling them. And you also have this whole group of Malaysians who are buying and selling them online.
Okay.
So the threats are enormous.
All right, I want to get more into the trading issue of this, the entire problem that we're having. But I'd like to get to Henry. As Elizabeth pointed out, we are facing new kind of threats. We are seeing, for example, orang-utans being sold online, and there is such a massive demand for this kind of products, and unfortunately, so from your work as an NGO and looking at all these threats, what can you tell us in terms of our efforts in stopping this in Malaysia?
I think from the work that we have done, like what, taking from what Prof. Latif has mentioned, we do a lot of outreach programs We do a lot of awareness creation amongst the youth, amongst the public, and all these are being done to actually create a better understanding on the importance of all the wildlife and also the birds. We take the birds quite lightly, but birds are actually at the top of the food chain, and anything that happens to the birds is an indicator of the health of the particular landscape. And here with MNS, we are actually doing the protection of the flyway. We call it, we are part of the East Australian Asian Flyway, where on a yearly basis we have this migratory waders, migratory birds. And in fact, there's also this program that we do every year called the Raptor Watch, which will be happening this Saturday at Tanjung Tuan. All this information are being put together and shared with countries along the flyway, so that we could collectively try to protect the habitats where these wildlife, the birds, and also to some extent the animals that habitate in this particular landscapes, to ensure that they have at least a good chance of survival. And then the indication of success is essentially the multiplication of this wildlife. If we see that the result is positive, then collectively I think we should congratulate and say ourselves and say that we have done something good.
I'd like to speak to Julian, who's going to tell us more about what's happening in our coast, in our marine biodiversity. So that's coming up. Don't stay away, we'll be back shortly.
Hidup saya berubah 8 tahun dahulu. Bila bapa ternampak satu iklan kemasukan untuk latihan juruteknik dari Petronas. Mengajar di langit tinggi. Dia suruh saya mohon, mana tahu rezeki, kata dia. Alhamdulillah saya diterima masuk ke Instep. Usaha dan peluang yang diberikan, kami telah pun berjaya.
Mula dulu pakcik ingat biar dia ganti pakcik. Tapi itulah hidup nelayan. Kais pagi makan pagi, kais petang makan petang.
Semua bapa mau anak dia berjaya.
Pakcik bangga dengan Hafizul, anak yang bijak dan patuh.
Sebenarnya kami ini tak berjauhan pun. Sama-sama mencari rezeki di laut.
Vision College, kerjaya cemerlang dalam kursus kesihatan dan bisnes. Hanya bayar RM500 dan jom masuk College Vision. Tawaran beasiswa. Sila hadir temu duga.
Hello and welcome. You are tuning into the Merdeka Award Roundtable, where we are discussing on the topic of biodiversity, which is timely given at this point of time we are facing probably one of the strongest El Nino phenomenon in almost 2 decades. And right now I'd like to get to Julian Hai, who is the General Manager of Reef Check Malaysia, just to tell us more about how climate change such as El Nino is affecting our corals and our marine biodiversity in Malaysia.
Well, potentially catastrophic effects. Warm seawater can, over a period of weeks, kill corals. It's that simple. The water is warming. All of the data we have from satellite information, from data loggers in the water, all of it is suggesting a warming trend of water. And if the water stays too warm for too long, and we're only talking 1, maybe 2 degrees centigrade for 4 to 6 weeks, perhaps a little more, then there could be widespread coral mortality. Now, one of the problems that we face, and with respect to Prof about the work that you've done on education and outreach and awareness, frankly, I don't think we've got there yet. I did a straw poll in the office this morning for three different, what does biodiversity mean? And we're talking a master's student and somebody who's a degree in environmental sciences, and somebody, the office junior. I got 3 different answers, and none of them were comprehensive. And I think if we cannot express what biodiversity is, what chance the man on the street is going to understand it? So when we deal with what I call the invisible ecosystem, because most people don't actually see coral reefs, we have an even bigger problem. We need to find even more creative ways to explain it. But if you talk about coral bleach, well, corals go white and they're bleached and they die. That's the short answer. But why does that matter to people?
Right.
If they don't see it? Well, because if the reefs die, the fish will die off. Because most fish, well, many marine species are associated with coral reefs, at least in part of their life cycle. And most Malaysians like fish, so, no more seafood. Does that sort of message work? It's pretty direct, it's pretty straightforward. It gets a response from people, but it's not a lasting response. And I think I find a lot of the time we have conversations with people, they'll say, well, I understand what you're saying, but it's not going to make me change my habits. There's nothing in there, there's nothing in our messages, all of the work we're doing, I'm sorry to say, that's sticking with people, apart from a passionate few. Going back to what Tan Sri said earlier on, the idea of ecosystem services, they're incredibly valuable. But again, talk to the man on the street. Do they really understand what ecosystem services are? I'm not convinced.
So what do you suggest? I mean, in your line of work, what more can be done then?
I think we have to, the approach that we're taking now is to stop trying to do widespread education campaigns. We're too small. And to go onto the ground and to work directly with the communities who rely on these things and plan to do work over a 5 or even 10-year period. So you take kids out of school at 11 years old, you start educating them then, you carry on educating them through secondary school, they go into the workforce, they're continually being given these messages, and I'm talking about a small community like Pulau Tierman, for example, Pulau Perhentian, small community, strong message about the value of the ecosystem services, of the forests on the island, of the marine ecosystems around the island, and continually telling them every single day to get that message through to a whole generation who will then be able to pass it on to the next. But if we do a campaign here, a campaign there, and it lasts a week, it lasts 3 months, there's no stick.
But I guess the other question is that how do you get the buy-in from local communities? How do you incentivize people to take part? For example, I'd like to cite something that's happening in Sabah in the Kinabatangan Corridor of Life. There's a project which seeks to connect this fragmented forest patches and swamps, but facing major stumbling block in the sense that locals are unwilling to give up land for conservation. So it comes down to the debate on conservation and economic growth. So how do we deal with that, given there is a necessity for human beings sense that they need the land for survival, and on the other hand, we have the depleting resources and the natural heritage?
If I can answer that, I have been the chairman of the WWF for the last 12 years, and presently I'm the president, and we have been doing fantastic job in Sabah with the local money, with international funding, at the place you mentioned, the Kinabatangan, the Corridor of Life, also at Sampurna, also at Kudat. Now we have done a wonderful job, and the state government is so supportive. The NGOs that were supportive, then the real players are, as you said, people on the ground, people who eat by the day, who fish by the day, and also I would say the industries, because the oil palm plantations were beginning to encroach into the Corridor of Life at Kinabatangan, and we have engaged with them, and some understood and some remediated the situation, but some are still in negotiation. So it's a long battle. We thought we are winning because we have been spending money. We thought we are winning because we have engaged the local, but of late we feel we are losing slowly again. It comes down to, on the ground, what do they need? And the things that they need are in the river, are in the corridor. So poaching come into play, and selling orangutan come into play. So it is a long battle, but we have not lost the battle in that sense. We are still asking for help from international friends, but we need the friends in Sabah in particular who are on the ground, but we've got them. But winning the government's commitment, winning the orang ketua kampung, the orang kaya-kaya sana, is not at all. It is the people who are moving around in the area who are depending for their livelihood in the area. And I would like to believe positively that we are winning, and yet we have got to engage them many more years.
You spoke about two important things, encroachment of space as well as spending money. Let's start with that encroachment of space, poaching, really big problem, deforestation, another one. How are we dealing with that? To what extent is that threat to biodiversity in Malaysia?
The point you raised about land encroachment and land ownership is at the heart of a lot of these issues.
Okay.
And I think the really important thing to realize is whenever states make any decision or local governments make any decision about land, it's with a view that it brings them income. Alienating land, opening land, developing land, this is how a state makes money. And until that aspect changes, until we find a different way for states or people who own the land to make money out of the land, or for the ecosystem services to contribute something back to them, when that paradigm changes, I think a lot of things will change. But until now, as Professor says, we have to fight the battle one place at a time. And many organizations are doing that on a piecemeal basis through individual projects. But in the long term, I don't think that's going to have the kind of lasting impact that you want. We have to look at the bigger picture, at how land is treated and how people view it. If governments and owners always see the land as a way to make money simply by opening it and developing it, if we don't find another way to do this, then I think a big part of the battle will always be there with us.
I think the point that you made also raises this another issue, which is sustainability. I mean, you can make money, you can use the land, but are we doing it in a sustainable manner?
I'd like to just share our experience and parallel to Sabah, and that's our work over at the Belum Temungo Forest Complex. I think the idea that we have been working for some years now is to create a contiguous forest complex across. That would be in itself, help the larger animals like the tigers, the elephants, and the benteng, to use that habitat, because these large animals require vast areas in which to roam, find food, and also to survive. And the Belum Temungo Forest Complex is one of that landscape currently. The other one, of course, is Endarompin, which is the bigger one. These are the two big complexes that the large animals are still now found. Beyond that, I think the threats for expanding this contiguous forest is essentially as what Elizabeth and also Prof. Latif has mentioned, as there are the federal government actually has a policy of protecting the forests, but in effect the administrator of the land is actually at state level. So at some point the two will have to meet somewhere to agree to say that, okay, I think this is a national policy, I think state should assist by providing land to allow for this continuous flow of forest so that it does not get disjointed. Just like, you have an island here and then suddenly you have development here. So we'll never have that contiguity of continuous forest in which will then be a successful integration of all the forests.
I'd like to go back to the core question here, and that's taking off from Julian's point. How do we get the message through? All right, let me try this one. If I say one of every 8 birds, one of every 4 mammals, one of every 3 amphibians is threatened with extinction, 6 out of 7 marine turtles and 1/3 of our coral reefs are threatened, what kind of response will you get? It's almost none. So what? I think the message, the narrative, Cynthia, has to be changed. I've been in this business quite long at the global level and also nationally. I think we have to change the storyline. I like to put forth the following. Let's assume biodiversity and ecosystem is a patient who is now sick, very sick. And here all of us are the relative of that patient. The patient cannot talk. So we have to decide we have to decide to bring back that patient to life, and hopefully he would carry on living. So those are the compelling questions that we should raise with the public, we should raise with the politicians, we should raise with the policymakers. If you don't have that, you can provide all these statistics, it doesn't cut ice. This is the problem.
Can we introduce a policy somewhere that requires a calculation of the negative cost on the ecosystem? Okay, so go ahead, build your resort, it's going to bring in this much money, that's the positive value, but it's going to have this impact on the ecosystem, and that's bigger, so sorry, you can't do it. Can we find a way to value? I don't like to use the economic value of ecosystems because it tends to degrade it a little bit and bring it all into economics, but perhaps that's the way forward, because the states want to make money. Well, how about saying, instead of developing that resort, keep the ecosystem as it is, because it will be more valuable in the long term. You'll make money off the resort in 5 years, but the reefs are worth a lot more over 20 years.
In fact, those kind of thinkings are already ongoing, But you must also appreciate the position of the politician. I deal with politicians almost on a regular basis. We can talk about conservation, we can talk about science, but the bottom line to them would still be, could you provide jobs? Could you provide jobs? Could you increase the wealth of the rakyat? Those are two basic things that would get them elected. And if you can find a way, and in some sense, what you mentioned, Julian, is very right, giving value to those corals, I think we can get somewhere.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so we're back to that debate, conservation, development, economic growth. We'll get right more into it, but first we have to go for our next commercial break. We'll see you in a bit, don't go away.
Hidup saya berubah 8 tahun dahulu. Bila bapa ternampak satu iklan kemasukan untuk latihan juruteknik dari Petronas. Memancar di langit tinggi. Dia suruh saya mohon, mana tahu rezeki, kata dia. Alhamdulillah saya diterima masuk ke Instep. Usaha dan peluang yang diberikan, kami telah pun berjaya.
Mula dulu pakcik ingat biar dia ganti pakcik. Tapi itulah hidup nelayan. Kais pagi makan pagi, kais petang makan petang.
Semua bapa mau anak dia berjaya.
Pakcik bangga dengan Hafizul, anak yang bijak dan patuh.
Sebenarnya kami ini tak berjauhan pun. Sama-sama mencari rezeki di laut.
Semua wira boleh terbang. Ada juga wira yang berbakti menyelamatkan nyawa di darat. Jadilah wira bersama Ramsey Sandabi Healthcare College yang disokong oleh rangkaian hospital bertaraf antarabangsa. Para graduan kami adalah pilihan para majikan. Hubungi kami sekarang.
我这么努力工作，就是为了做一个负责任的丈夫。
मैं जो मेहनत करता हूँ जिससे मेरी लड़कियाँ खुशहाल जिंदगी जी सकें।
我努力工作是希望以后有更大的发展，更好的未来。
Everyone has a real destination. The road ahead may be hard work, but the journey doesn't have to be. Shell Ringula, the engine oil that works as hard as you.
Welcome back. This is the Merdeka Award Roundtable. We are talking about biodiversity. Now, the loss of biodiversity may not seem to many people as dramatic, for example, like compared to, say, finding a job, but that makes it no less important or urgent. But how do we get that across? Who wants to start?
Well, I would go since independence. We have been at development. We have changed from rubber boom to oil palm boom, and we have industrialized our country. And where we are now, we are a developing economy with so high aims to become industrialized very soon, in another 4 years. So we have done good, and I am for it. I have seen, the standard of living, the way we conduct ourselves has been, I would say, democratically well endowed with this kind of balance, development. And we have indices, we have indicators, we have all sort of wish list. We want to keep 59% of our forest. That is already instituted. We want to have the minimum pay. We have got so many indicators. Now we have got all those. Somebody has got to figure out, how do we balance development as we have envisaged to come in the next many years, and preserving, protecting our biodiversity, our marine, our animal, our plant, and there are ways to do it. I mean, I would like to look at some examples in the developed world when they have lost much of the biodi, and they came back to tell us that we should keep our biodi. Now, I don't want to wait for that time. I want to do it now. When we are at the crossroad now, I think the balance, somebody has got to come out. Are we 50-50 or are we 40-60? And how do you reach that? I think Tasir Zakri has gone through that.
Yeah. No, I like what you put as an argument. I think that development aspect has to be there.
Yes.
And if you recall, during our independence, the level of poverty was about 46%, and now it's around 4%.
Yes.
And when we gained independence, one of the program was the FELDA program, Tun Razak's project, Land for the Landless, which he introduced so well, which alleviate poverty.
Yes.
And the FELDA scheme has been acknowledged by no less person like the economist Jeffrey Sachs from Columbia University as saying that is a good way to alleviate poverty. But again, we need to find the balance. Politicians like the Prime Minister is very aware of that. And that is why 2 weeks ago, he launched the national policy on biodiversity, in which there are provisions, like for instance to create this central forest spine. This is forest contiguous in the peninsula, where your tigers can roam, your rhinoceros can come back, and all that. And in the states of Sabah and Sarawak, their conservation effort is just tremendous. The national parks, the marine areas.
Coral Triangle?
Yes, we are trying our best, but sometimes we also get a bad press. And let's also admit, sometimes there are infringes to those lofty aims, and one of that maybe is the lack of implementation.
I'd like to go back to something that Tan Sri Zakri said, because the new BioD policy, one of the key parts of it is mainstreaming biodiversity. And I think we're going back almost to the beginning and saying, well, the man on the street doesn't know what biodiversity is. Government departments, state planning departments don't know what biodiversity is. How can we use the mainstreaming issue, which, like I said, is in the new BioD policy, to get through to state decision makers, to get through to economic decision makers, developers, plantation owners, whatever it is, to say, when you plan for a development, be it for an island, be it for a plantation, be it for another building, put into the equation the cost of the biodiversity or the cost of the damage to the biodiversity. Maybe that's how we can get this message through, is to take this mainstreaming thing and really almost force it down people's throat. If they're not listening, we have to make them listen. And it's easy to sit here and say we have to make them listen, but what the debate I'd like to engage in separately perhaps is, how do we make that? Because I think that's tremendously important, is to get everybody to understand why we've got to stop taking the pangolins out of the jungle. Right now, it's because I need to feed my family. Okay, how do we turn that into an economic opportunity for that community and protect the wildlife at the same time? You guys must have some ideas on that.
Actually, we have a lot of trouble with that, because on the one hand, on the one hand, you have the people who are driven by economic needs, right? But what we're seeing increasingly, at least with wildlife trafficking in Malaysia, is sometimes it turns out to be a business endeavor. They're looking at it as a new business opportunity, and you have people who look at it as a sport, especially when it comes to hunting. In a lot of these rural communities, it's fun to go out with your friends and, for exciting night out in the jungle, and you come back and you can tell people, oh, I caught a tiger, or, you're the big macho man now, So a lot of that is going on, and attitudes are changing, and very often when we try and have outreach programs and talk to people in forest fringe areas about the hunting, they turn around and look at you and say, well, God gave this to me. Why can't I take it? It is my right. And these are arguments that you find across the board, and they're very, very difficult to argue with. So in terms of changing the messaging or trying new methods, we're talking to religious authorities throughout the country to try and see whether that attitude towards animals can be changed through religious teachings. We're going back to primary school to do primary school programs, because most of the kids we speak to at primary school level can name you giraffe, lion, rhino, the big five that they see on Nat Geo. They can't tell you what a Malaysian animal is. And you know, these are the basic problems that you're dealing with. And we're trying many methods in countries like Vietnam, where traffic works on rhino horn trade, for instance. What we're starting to do is interview people who use it to find out why they're using it, what drives this trade. And until we have a better understanding of that, a lot of these approaches are going to be piecemeal or hit and miss. But we have to start going back and talking to everyday people, to the housewife, to the villager, to the civil servant. I find civil servants' level of knowledge on a lot of these things is quite frighteningly low, considering they are the ones in charge of making a lot of decisions and implementing a lot of policy. So we have to start. Step number one will be going back and just talking to a lot of people about what they know and why they're doing the things that they're doing.
All right. I'll have to bring this discussion to a next break, but I think what you mentioned, as well as consumers, businesses also have a significant role to play in reversing the loss of biodiversity. That we will discuss after the break. Stay with us.
我这么努力工作，就是为了做一个负责任的丈夫。
मैं जो कोई मेहनत करता हूँ जिससे मेरी लड़कियाँ खुशहाल जिंदगी जी सकें।
我努力工作是希望以后有更大的发展，更好的未来。
Everyone has a real destination. The road ahead may be hard work, but the journey doesn't have to be. Shell Ringula, the engine oil that works as hard as you.
Belajar bertutur dan menulis dalam bahasa Inggeris dari rumah. Mudah kan? Ya. Belajar dengan selesa melalui sistem audio dan video. Kami menawarkan pelbagai kursus bahasa Inggeris mengikut tahap kesesuaian anda. Hubungi kami hari ini.
You don't need to think about the energy that makes our lives possible, because we do. We're ExxonMobil. Empowering the world responsibly is our job. Because boiling an egg isn't as simple as just boiling an egg. Life takes energy. Energy lives here.
You're watching the Merdeka Award Roundtable. We are on the topic of biodiversity, and earlier we touched on how consumers and businesses also have a significant role to play to reverse the loss of biodiversity. Now, Julian, for example, let's take the example of banning the sale of shark fins. You know, when the buying stops, the killing stops, so that's what they say. But how effective has this been in the sense, that campaign, that the message that's been sent out?
I hate to sound negative and go against all of the good work that is being done on this, but the fact we're still having this, the fact that it's still going on, suggests to me that what we have done has not been terrifically successful. I mean, there have been anti-shark finning campaigns going on for at least 20 years that I know of, if not more. I remember being involved in some discussions with the Ministry of Environment back in 2008, and somebody had proposed a program of beach cleanups. And the lady from the ministry said, the special assistant to the minister said, why are we still doing beach cleanups? I mean, we keep doing it, right? Yes, we do. Why? Because we're wasting our time. What we should be doing is dealing with this problem at source. So instead of going to clean the beach up, stop the waste getting into the water in the first place. And that's an easy one, but her point was, we keep doing the same thing and nothing changes. And I think the thing with shark's fin is we simply haven't got the right message through to the right people yet.
Who are the right people?
Oh, crikey Moses. The people that think shark's fin is good for them in some way, it's not. It's just cartilage. It's the broth that has all of the taste. The people that don't understand the position of the shark in the ecosystem, back to the biodiversity argument, you take the shark out, everything below that starts to fall apart. And when you remove that shark, then the whole trophic layer in the marine ecosystem starts to fall apart, which means that we will see less food fish and we will see more jellyfish. And so on. Now, who needs to understand this? Well, the Department of Fisheries needs to understand it, Summer Parks, Department of Marine Parks needs to understand it, the consumers need to understand it, but I don't know how to get through to them. We have not yet been able to do so. You know, there are similar problems with wildlife trafficking. I mean, who do we talk to? I mean, you want to go to the man in Semporna who's fishing and shark and finning there. He's just trying to feed his family.
That's right.
Right? So we're back to economic development as well. Mainstream it so that the government understands and includes it in decisions, but also look at where it's happening and see what's the economic development issues here that are forcing this guy to do this. How can we stop that?
So the issue of mainstreaming biodiversity into everyday life of individuals, who are the stakeholders here and what more can be done? For example, corporates, there are some who are actively involved in that, but are they translating it into effective conservation on the ground? Perhaps Elizabeth can answer that.
I don't see a great deal of corporate involvement in this beyond CSR programs, to be honest. You know, the corporations should really be going beyond a token tree planting project or a token beach cleanup project, as Julian mentioned, or, you know, releasing a couple of, you know, turtle hatchlings. It has to be part of their process. It has to be part of the business decisions. And I can give you a good example of one of our donors for a project, the Body Shop Malaysia. After some time of working with us and, you know, doing small little projects like this, they were offered to be part of a very important fashion show. And they asked the question to the fashion show organizers, will you be using animal skins? And the fashion show organizer said, well, I can't guarantee that we won't. And so they pulled out. So those are the kinds of decisions we would like to see corporations making, because their dollar speaks volumes. And it also sends a message to an entire customer base that they have. So they have to change the way they do business first.
Well, you mentioned dollar. I'd like to get into the topic of funding. How big of a stumbling block is funding in your conservation efforts?
Very difficult. We are always looking for funds on a yearly basis, continuously. And quite fortunately, we have been able to also get funds from the corporate side. We have had opportunities to actually run centers. Yeah, we have 8 centers throughout the country. And one of our biggest supporter actually is Petronas, which actually built a center, and then we manage it. Because the other sensitive area that some might think is our association with Vale Minerals. Yeah, they are voted, as you know, it's quite open knowledge. But we look at it from a different perspective. We look at it from, if you don't engage, if you do not engage and provide expertise, you do not provide advice, you leave them alone, what's going to happen? We won't be able to determine more damage, perhaps, you know, that they will do. But if we engage with them, we at least have a semblance of providing information, providing guidance, so that they would know how to work within certain guidelines.
I think we are also seeing more examples of that. You know, we're seeing Shell getting involved in the Danung Valley Conservation, Earthwatch. Also mentioned Petronas in the Beacon Marine Life Regeneration Project in Bintulu to preserve biodiversity.
I agree with all that you have said. Eventually, I think it's a question of mainstreaming. And mainstreaming means getting the buy-in, not only of the NGOs, not only of the corporate sector, but also government. And government, as Elizabeth pointed out, at every level, at the local level, at the state level, and at the federal level. Preferably, if someone could champion that, and the best champion would be the head of government, the Prime Minister. And I'm not too keen on insisting on laws and regulations. They're good, but hopefully, I hope we could come to a stage where it's our conscience, that we feel that we need to do this for the common good, for our country and also for the globe. But that takes a lot of investment, a change of mindset,
I think, sorry if I may add, I think there's some things that we can do quite quickly. To give you a simple example and to talk about funding, right? Whenever land is cleared in a heavily forested place which is rich with wildlife, we inevitably find a lot of that wildlife dead on the road, or running into people's houses and causing conflicts or trampling over people's farms, right? And why isn't there a simple levy charged for every time one of these forested areas with large volumes of wildlife, why isn't there a levy charged to the person or the entity that's clearing the land, simply to enable funding for an agency like the Wildlife Department to deal with the conflict? Translocating an elephant is expensive. It's incredibly expensive, and the Wildlife Department is already under stress for so much funding. They hardly have anything to work on, and something like this would go directly to them to deal with the problem. Why should they have to bear that cost, or why should villagers have to bear the cost of elephants trampling through their plantations or whatever?
Business isn't doing it today because it's not required to, and because that would be a cost on my business. I'm not going to do that. I make less profit. We need to change the thinking and say that's actually now, today, that is now part of the cost of you doing business. You're going to make less profit because we require you, through regulation or policy, whatever, we require you to repair the biodiversity loss that you have created. So I'm sorry, you're going to have to pay to move that elephant. And we've all got to accept lower share dividends, lower profitability in our companies, but these are mechanisms that we can find. It's not there yet, but it's an idea. Just make the companies pay for the biodiversity that they're damaging. We've got to get used to that.
Or reconsider using that piece of land altogether.
Right. Yes, or
because the
do
business
something
cost
else.
is too high.
Yeah.
Sorry to stop you guys, but we
Sorry.
had to go for a last commercial break. But let's talk about mechanisms to promote sustainable use of resources and to have conservation and development go hand in hand in a sustainable manner. That we'll discuss in the last segment of this Merdeka Award Roundtable. Do stay tuned, we'll be back shortly.
You don't need to think about the energy that makes our lives possible, because we do. We're ExxonMobil. Empowering the world responsibly is our job. Because boiling an egg isn't as simple as just boiling an egg. Life takes energy. Energy lives here.
Welcome back. This is the last segment of the Merdeka Award Roundtable, whereby we've been discussing biodiversity. I think we've come down to this notion that how can we best promote the use of this invaluable ecosystem? How best can we regulate stakeholders, as well as what best to incentivize them to be part of this effort?
Can I start that by touching on the global development? The issue of biodiversity is it's a crucial issue globally, and they have this UN convention called the Convention on Biological Diversity with three aims: one, conservation of biodiversity; second, sustainable use of biodiversity; third, access and benefit sharing of biological resources. It was signed in 1992, and Malaysia is one of the 200 countries that are signatories to this crucial treaty. But sadly, today, the decline in biodiversity is still happening. So it begs the question, is not out of awareness at the global level, but the action is really and should be at the national level and at the local level, because biodiversity also now is not a global concern, but is not the global commons. It's the sovereign rights of nation, So Malaysia, for instance, being one of the 12 mega diverse countries in the world, we should take pride in that, but we should also see that level of biodiversity is preserved. So how do we do that nationally? I think Latif knows best.
Well, we mentioned earlier, we have lots of policies in place, but does it come down to enforcing them? Perhaps we need more regulation. I'm not sure.
You raise a very pertinent issue, because when the National Biodiversity Policy came out in 1998 and now revised, just launched 2 weeks ago, it's a beautiful document. All right, I mean, Tansi knows best. But the thing is, the stewardship, the ownership, all land, water and resources and biodiversity belong to the state. As simple. Therefore, the state in particular must champion their resources, and sustainability must come to the state. Then, except for Sarawak and Sabah, which to my mind are to the forefront, and possibly other states, the other state in Peninsula said they don't have the capacity to address the policy. They don't have the manpower. They don't have the knowledge. Now that is what we have, that was what we thought, 17 years ago? We want every state to champion, because it is their resources, their green asset. In particular, state with a lot of resources, Perak, Johor, Pahang, Terengganu, Kelantan, Terengganu, and the turtle. And we have done this, but yet the buy-in, take for example the turtle. We were trying very hard for the state government of Terengganu to buy into the turtle conservation. They say, what? It is the habit, the culture of Terengganu people to eat the turtle eggs. They say, well, it's true. But the thing is, if the state Terengganu, can champion conservation of turtle, and Melaka also, and Sabah and Sarawak, I think we may win some. But still, I would like to see all protected areas are within the state jurisdiction. Every single thing. Therefore, I like to challenge every state to take into their stride, to preserve and to use and to share with other states and other stakeholders of what they have.
The Malaysia's marine parks, of which there are numerous, are managed at federal level. And the marine park is essentially the water around the island.
Yes.
So the Marine Parks Department is responsible for managing what happens in the water, but state is responsible for what happens on land.
Yes, right.
And if they want to develop, as you're saying, they go ahead and develop. The impact that has on the water is not their problem.
Exactly.
So you have this state-federal mismatch because of the legislation, because of the way that's been organised. So we need
concurrent.
Thank you. The concurrent list. We need the states to take more responsibility for the development, and I think this is a key thing. It's a nice policy, but if the states don't actually take it into account in terms of development, then it won't work.
And where do you start to breach that gap? Granted, we have all these policies in place, but what's really happening? I mean, why is it not translating into what is expected?
I think essentially is the state, as we mentioned earlier, sees the forest, sees the land as a source of income. And I think if that can be sustainably developed, I think, together with development. Because I think most of us, we are not against development per se, but it must be developed in a sustainable manner. And I think that can be achieved with greater understanding between the objective of achieving certain development benchmark and also allowing for biodiversity to thrive. And having said that, the different requirements for achieving that can actually be set as targets. Because I think the earlier plan that Tan Sri as well as Professor Latif mentioned, I think there were some very statements, they're actually statements of a fact that we want to achieve, but by when? There was no set targets.
So
but the latest one, which I'm pleased to say, that there are now benchmarks to say that we're going to achieve that by when,
That's right.
under different categories.
Right.
So we're moving positively, we're moving forward, and we hope
Are we moving fast enough though? I mean, the rate
we hope we could run. We are now just starting to walk, but I think we're getting there.
Okay.
We hope,
How
at
do you
some
expedite
point.
that process? The rate of deforestation, the rate of the loss of biodiversity is moving so much faster than our conservation efforts, sadly, as it is. But maybe you have any ideas on how we can approach that in a more urgent manner?
I think we are all collectively responsible. That's what I like about mainstreaming. That's why I like why we need to increase the level of awareness of appreciation about biodiversity among members of the public. And it could even start with the children in kindergarten, right, to lifelong. We need to have that appreciation.
Okay, this everyone talks about educating and starting from young, and that's important. But I think, at the rate things are going, as you said, in the last 5 years, we have seen so many animals and plant species and marine species, just wiped out. I don't think we have the luxury of that kind of time. I think the mechanisms are there, the ideas are known, they are not anything unusual. It's the will to do it.
The cane and the carrot.
And we have to find champions everywhere. In government, in the public, in corporations. If someone just stands up and says, I'm going to make sure that this gets done, it will get done.
I think we are part of the problem, honestly.
Yep.
I think the NGOs are failing to a degree. We are talking to central government because it's easy, they're in Putrajaya, they're just down the road. We're not talking to the state government of Pahang, we're not talking to the state government of Terengganu. Maybe we should be spending more time at that level, assisting this process of pushing the message down from the Prime Minister down to the state level where the decisions on land development are made. I think we're failing on that, for sure.
I would also argue that we need to do this together. It's not a case of we against them or we on one side. We need to
just to put the record straight, we are talking to state governments.
Okay, when I say we're failing, not everybody is, but I think there's a degree to which we're concentrating too much on.
And Tan Sri is right. State governments will need a lot of support to make sure that the mainstreaming of the biodiversity policy actually happens. Federal government agencies will need a lot of support to make sure that this happens. Everyone, even schools will need to make sure that, the way we educate children about biodiversity changes, and, that's a big role that we all have to play.
This is happening because every state wants to bring visitors to the state, either ecotourism or whatever. And what do the ecotourists wanted to see? Take, for example, Sabah. Again, the pristine natural resources, the coral, including the mountain, and every state has got that natural resources, So if we, the NGOs and what Nas was saying, the masses, engage the state government, this is one way to go through sustainable development. Making use of your resources to make money for your state. Every state will make money. We are engaging Perak now with Royal Bloom, or Temanggu you mentioned. There's a vast piece of land with all the beauties and all the iconic species where we can make some so-called plan to bring ecotourists. So there are ways to make things done.
We've come to the end of the show. Thank you so much for your insights. But I guess, in conclusion, we talk about recognizing the value of biodiversity, and we have the policies, just time to get everyone on board towards the same destination. All right, thank you so much, folks, ladies, gentlemen, and it was a pleasure to hear your insights on how can we reverse the loss of biodiversity and how can we conserve the natural heritage that we have. And also I'd like to thank the Malaysian Petroleum Club for hosting this 13th Merdeka Award Roundtable. Thank you very much. And also to find out more about the Merdeka Award, you also can check us out on Facebook. And that's all we have for this episode. Do stay tuned. We'll be back for more. Once again, I'm Cynthia Ng. See you soon.